Welcome again to another session of the 15th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. I'm Bob Ailes. I'm your moderator. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Hopefully somebody got at least one Valentine. Our session this afternoon is how to increase student course rating participation. 4 strategies that work. And we have with us Tom Tobin. He's been with us a zillion times or something close to that. He is a founding member of the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Mentoring at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And also he's an internationally recognized scholar, author, and speaker on technology-mediated education. He's written numerous books. I think I heard the Library of Congress is going to build a new wing just to house all your books. But things like evaluating online teaching, implementing best practices, the Copyright Ninja, which is a really good one, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, Universal Design for Learning and Higher Education, and several others. He is prolific. He really does best practices when it comes to presenting in an environment like this. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Tom. So let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Bob. I'm grateful for your invitation to come be part of TTLE 15. And for those of you who are here on the live session, thank you for bringing your voice and ideas here this afternoon. I'm grateful to have you here. If you're watching the recorded version of this session, please know that we're going to get interactive. So have a way to take some notes or think on your own. And for those of you here in the live session, 2 little housekeeping things before we begin. One, we're using the Zoom tools. Many of you know where the reactions button is so that you can raise your hand to come onto the live microphone. Yet many of you know how to use the chat. If you go down to your controls, though, it may be buried under the More button over there at the end, but you can also turn on captions, and we'll use automatically generated artificial intelligence captions here today. You have local control over those. So if you'd prefer to see the words as we're speaking them, it's pretty good. A second housekeeping thing, we are going to be interacting today. There are many ways for you to be in this session. One of them is lurking. Just have your camera on or off and don't say a thing. Just think for yourself, take notes for yourself, totally okay. You can also come into the chat. We'll give voice to those things. I am interruptible today. So if something we're talking about sparks an idea or a question, please post it in the chat or use that raise hand feature in Zoom, and we'll recognize you and bring you onto the live microphone, and you can be part of the conversation today as well. With that in mind, let me do a quick screen share and we'll get going. On your screen here is a title slide that says how to increase student course rating participation, 4 strategies that work. And there's a smiling picture of me in a suit with the TTLE 2023 logo and my name. Also, as we're going along, 4 strategies that work, you're going to get a bonus today. We'll talk about 4 strategies that don't work as well. So as we're getting started, on your screen is an image of a professor at the front of a packed lecture room. The professor is turning to explain a microscope slide that's being projected onto the wall. And there's a thought balloon here. He says, "I am so great, remember this." And one of the students is thinking, "Oh, wait, was that important? I was on Instagram." So the challenge for us as teaching and learning professionals is that our students, when they give ratings of their experiences in our classes, they can be distracted by something as simple as cookies. There's a beautiful piece of research, and I'm happy to point people to it, but your librarians can help you with this as well. Research that came out in 2022 showing that just having freshly baked cookies at the very end session of a course, when the students were doing the rating form, actually bumped up the instructor's ratings by a factor of almost 2 points on that 5-point scale. So the same instructor, the same class, one section got cookies, one section didn't get cookies, and they liked the cookie professor better. We tend to remember the ends of our experiences much more than we remember the beginnings and middles of them. That's a little cognitive neuroscience for everybody. So one of the other challenges is by the time we get to the end of our experience and someone says, hey, would you take a survey? Would you tell us how we did? Would you rate our work? Most of us don't care for or about all that stuff. And if you pardon me for just a moment, I'm going to hit mute here. You can see the power just went out at my house, so pardon me, I got to flip a switch.
Got to keep putting those quarters in, Tom.
Yeah, apparently, it looks like we got a power surge here in my neighborhood. Can you hear me okay, Bob?
Oh, yeah, just fine.
All right, fantastic. Yep. And my poor partner's in the other room giving a session on another call, and she lost her connection too. So forgive me on that one. As we're thinking about our session today, what I'd like to do is talk about common survey strategies that a lot of us use that don't actually help to increase response rates. If you're looking at your survey response rates and only a few of your students are doing them, we can save ourselves some effort and talk about things that don't actually work. We can also talk about 4 specific strategies that do increase survey response rates. We can talk about what questions to ask if you want to actually take action based on the information that your students are giving you. And we can also think together about how to increase survey adoption rates across campus. So if you take away nothing from our session today than these pieces, you'll be doing all right. So let's get started. I'd like to ask a question for everybody. On your screen is a survey instrument. The instructor was well prepared, was open to disagreement, covered the course material at a fair pace, was available for consultation during posted office hours. And you see those Likert scale, strongly agree, disagree, somewhat buttons in the background. The question I'd like to ask is how many of your courses, programs, or departments are using student rating surveys as part of the assessment of the teaching of the instructors in those areas? What are the biggest obstacles to using those rating surveys? Is it the fact that not many people respond? Is it too difficult? What kinds of challenges did you see? Or answer this last question: what do you actually do with the results of your surveys when you get them? I'm going to put 1 minute of music on. You'll hear that just to allow you to do a little thinking. You can post something in the chat. You can wait until that 1 minute of music is over with and use that raise hand feature. We'll bring you on the live microphone, or just post your notes for yourself and keep them to yourself. But I'd like you to answer one of these questions that's on your screen. Here comes a little bit of that music, and you should hear that for about 1 minute. Thank you, everybody, for a little time for thinking. We've got some ideas coming through in the chat. Would anybody care to unmute your microphone and share if you haven't had a chance to put it in the chat? Let's give voice to some of the things that you are all saying here. Liz says, all of our courses use the IDEA ratios. So the IDEA Center, I think they got bought out by Blackboard Anthology and a couple of different companies. But back in the day, IDEA were the folks who had the psychometrically balanced questions for student ratings. Liz says response rate is the biggest obstacle to the utility of the results. I review the results to consider possible course or teaching improvements. So good answers to all of those questions that we've asked just temporarily here. Shelley says we require those ratings for all courses for all instructors every semester at our college. Our biggest obstacle is the low response rates. And I use the survey to inform myself what's working well and if any improvements might be needed. But I find I get better information about this from my own course surveys than the institutional one, which I can't control the questions asked. Ooh, Shelley, if I could reach through the webinar and give you a high five right now, I'd totally do it because Shelley is on to something. And we'll see how right she is in about 6 slides. So hang on to that idea. Megan says at Simon Fraser University, I think that's SFU, most courses get evaluations. It depends on the faculty member's rank for how often and how many courses. Elena says instructional designer here, we use IDEA, but sometimes find we don't reach our goal for the number of students participating. And Megan also puts a +1 for the IDEA instruments at SFU. Liz is also commenting here, oh, St. Francis, I apologize. Liz is also commenting, I agree with Shelley, prompts for feedback as the course go along or spontaneous feedback are often more valuable. Yes, that's actually one of the things we want to take away from our time here today. So you folks, this is great. You have a wonderful foundation from which to build. And the most common challenge that I've heard is low response rates. So let's talk about how to get those response rates to rise here. And I'm going to, for the recording, one of the challenges of recordings is that nothing from the chat gets into the video recording. So I'm going to post right here some of those comments that folks have put into the chat. And I'm just doing a little copy paste so that we have a record of what folks have said. There we go. All right. Thank you, everybody, for all those shares. We'll have a couple more shares coming up here in a minute, but first, I'd like to share 4 strategies that almost everybody uses that don't correlate to higher student response rates on those student ratings at the end of the term. On your screen is an instructor. She's in hip shirt that's got the nice pattern to it, and the blackboard behind her, the whiteboard behind her, is filled with scribbles and lines, and she's got dry erase marker all over her forehead and her arms, and she's been through a minute in the classroom, right? So a frustrated and challenged person. The first thing that doesn't actually work is prize drawings or things that operate like prize drawings. Many of you may have seen your colleagues say to students, please do the end of term ratings and your name will be put in separately from the rating for an iPad or a new computer or, several other prizes. The challenge with prize drawings is the same reason why not everyone plays the lottery and not everyone wins the lottery. If there isn't a guarantee of a tangible reward, then folks are less likely to treat the opportunity at a chance the same way as a social obligation. Some of you may have read a couple of books by, Daniel Willingham and Amos Oz, psychologists, and they've written articles, and it's also in a book, the story of the daycare center in Israel that was concerned that parents coming to pick up their children many of them were coming later and later. If the daycare center closed at 5 p.m., some parents wouldn't come until 10 minutes past the hour or 20 minutes past the hour, and they were making the staff stay later. So the daycare instituted a fine, and they said, please forgive us. They sent a message around to all the parents, forgive us, but for every 10 minutes that you're late, we're going to have to charge you a certain amount of money. And what happened was the parents ended up actually being later, and more of them were late because previously being late was a social obligation. Being late was, I owe it to these people to be there on time. And by putting money into it, the challenge then became, oh, well, I can afford that money. I can afford the time for being late, so I'll just pay the fine. So when we think about prize drawings, they act in the same way in our brains. So unless everybody gets the tangible thing, the reward, a prize drawing actually tends not to have any effect on student ratings and response rates. On your screen now is a student, and he has a bunch of little orange Post-it notes stuck all over his face and his ear. Repeated reminders. This one seems counterintuitive, but when I was in charge of the student ratings at one of my previous institutions, and Shelley's asking, do we have research citations to support these non-working incentives? Yes, there is a handout for this session, and you can see it in the materials for the session on the TTLE website. So Shelley says, I need this information for my institution. Yeah, absolutely. All this stuff is based on data and research that other folks have done or research that I myself have done. So for example, in this case, when I was at my previous institution, we would send out the initial invitation to do the end of term ratings the week before exams began. And then if the students hadn't gone in and started the ratings yet, we would send them a reminder. And then it was 1 week in between, then it was 5 days, then it was 3 days, then it was every other day. If you hadn't started, we would send you a reminder. There's a psychological concept called perverse incentive. And what that means is and Liz is saying, I don't see where to find the handout. Check with me afterwards. I'll give you my contact information. I'll be happy to send you the materials as well separately. Perverse incentive, though, the first reminder works. So if you haven't gone in a week and it's, oh, by the way, make some time for these student ratings, that first one works. The second reminder works, but less effectively. Fewer people will actually take action than with the first reminder. The third reminder, we start going into perverse reward territory. What that means is the third reminder, people just get annoyed and they say, well, if you're going to keep bugging me, I'm not even going to bother with it. And we often saw in those reminders, people would send a message back to us saying, how do I shut these damn things off? I'm not going to do your stupid survey. Just stop it. So perverse reminders, perverse rewards and repeated reminders, they tend to work only up to a point. And this is something that a lot of us are actually doing at our institutions. So those don't work. There's the circle with the slash through it on your screen over that same picture. The third one also seems counterintuitive. Longer time windows. On your screen is an image of a calendar with one date in red, and the dates are fading away across the screen. You would think that if you gave students a 3-day window during which to do their student ratings of teaching effectiveness, that fewer of them would do it during that 3-day window than if you gave them a 2-week window to do it. One of the blessings of going to electronic rating instruments is that people can do them anytime, anywhere. And the curse of electronic rating instruments is that people can do them anytime and anywhere, which means that those tasks fall to the bottom of our mental lists as students. The challenge with longer time windows, think about it for a moment. You've published a paper or you're working on your tenure and promotion portfolio, or you have something that is due on a certain day. How much of the effort and work do you put in over the month before the deadline versus the last couple of days? Now, most of us would completely lie and say, oh, yes, I understand how to segment my work, and I do a quarter of it here and a quarter of it here and a quarter and a quarter, and everything runs very smoothly from the time I start the work to the deadline. That is a lie for most of us, right? So if you're like me, the deadline approaches and you think, I'd better buckle down and really get to it. Maybe I've done some outlining. Maybe I've done the preliminary steps, but I do need to make that time. The challenge when you say to students, hey, it's 2 weeks away from the deadline, in their minds, they can think, oh, awesome. I have 2 weeks to fit this in somewhere. And then somewhere never comes. And then when they receive the reminder about, hey, this is the last day, they don't have a moment to fit it in. Or even worse, they remember about it after the deadline or the survey is already closed. So the challenge with longer time windows, there's that circle with the slash to indicate this one doesn't work. The challenge with longer time windows is psychologically, when we think we have a lot of time to do something that should be quick, we tend to forget about it, and then we don't pick it back up before the period of time runs out. So it's actually a lot more effective to say to students, your student ratings are going to be open during this 3-day period, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and then that's it. So make some time on those days to give us that feedback. And one more that doesn't work, direct monetary or value rewards. This one, you have two young boys in business suits with glasses on, and they've got a piggy bank and a whole bunch of money in front of them, and they're yelling excitedly about the fact that they have money on this one. Shelley is saying in the chat, I can apply this information to my own class surveys. Short time frame, only 2 reminders, one when it opens, one on the last day. And Shelley gives the hooray emoji as well there. Cool. Direct money and value rewards. Remember those parents dropping or picking up their children from the daycare center? As soon as money came into it, it became less of a social obligation and more of a, ooh, can I afford the late fee? So the challenge with this is, when we're doing the student ratings, we don't often say, if you complete the ratings, we will give you $5. But a lot of colleges and universities do exactly that when they say, if you complete your student ratings for your courses, we will credit your account with $5 that you can spend in the cafeteria. We'll give you a $5 Starbucks card or Subway restaurants card. And anything that stands in for monetary value, if it's small enough, people think, well, you're paying me to do this and you're not paying me a lot. My time is not worth your $5. I'm not even going to bother. So staying on the side of social obligation is actually a much more useful incentive for people to take part in interactions, especially things that are not required. So if you have direct money or direct value rewards, those tend to backfire because they're small. And we can't afford to pay people $35 a piece just to take their course ratings. So what other things don't seem to work? I've talked about prize drawings, repeated reminders, the longer time windows, direct value ads. Are there other things here? Let me post 1 more minute on the clock and you'll hear some music here. And I'll also key that question in the chat. Or if you have a story to share about any one of these, or you want to +1 one of these because you've seen it not working in your scenario, post that in the chat or come on to the live microphone when the music's over with. We'll start that music here now. I'm no disc jockey. I'm actually manually doing the fade on that. So forgive me if that music ended a little bit abruptly. I see Shelley in the chat saying she hasn't seen research or evidence about what does and doesn't work. So she's excited to explore that and looking at the resources that I've put together. So thank you, Shelley, for that. Anybody else care to think with me a little bit out loud here, or share an example, or ask a question at this point? I see a few things coming through in the chat. Megan saying, I feel like I don't know what I don't know. That's actually an easy place to be when we're talking about student ratings here. Shelley, I see you've got your hand raised. Would you like to come on the microphone and share an idea?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. I hear a lot of faculty say that they offer extra credit. So I'm curious if that works. You said rewards there, direct monetary or value rewards don't work. Would that count as the same kind of incentive?
If you can hang on for 3 more slides,
Sure.
we will answer that question. Excellent. Thank you very much. Karen's in the chat saying, are participation points the same as monetary value? They're not. And we'll talk about why they're not. You and Shelley are onto something here. And I want to underline it in just a few slides here. And Liz is saying, explaining the reason that we want the feedback doesn't seem to increase the feedback. I'll also tell you, I'll share a secret out loud here. Many of you were talking about using your own forms during the middle of the term to get actionable feedback. That's one of the biggest reasons why students don't do those rating forms is you take this term's crop of students and you hear what they have to say, and then you make changes for next semester's students. So the students today don't get to see that any change has happened. And the students tomorrow don't know what you have changed. So one of the big challenges for us in ratings is people don't respond to them because they cannot see the effect and value of their own responses. And Megan just gave a +1 to that. So I'm glad that that resonates with everybody. Let's talk a little bit here. Shelley's talking about that's why I use my own surveys and feedback multiple times throughout the semester. And that is actually one of the things that helps immensely. So let's shift in that direction. Let's talk about the 4 things that do actually work in terms of increasing student response rates on the ratings. On your screen are a number of graduates getting out of high school. I think that's the National Honor Society logo on one of their caps and gowns. And one of them is turning to the camera and giving a big grin and a thumbs up. So when we're thinking about that, and okay, so we've got some folks in the chat going, me too, Shelley. We're part of the same community of practice doing this. Please use the chat for that side conversation, especially as well. Joyce is saying responses for my midterm and every other week kinds of short rating forms are actually great, but the end of the term ratings, not so much. The first thing that actually works is what you all are talking about right now. And that is not waiting until the end of the experience for students to be asked how things are going. Instructors who, whether they are using an official instrument from the institution or they're using their own homegrown ones, instructors who ask for students' experience, ask them to share what's going on, we call it the SCARF loop: solicit, compile, adjust, and report on your feedback. On the screen, those 4 words are in a circle showing that it's a cyclical thing. Near solicit, there's a student with her hand on her chin looking off up to the ceiling like she's thinking. Next to compile are some gears moving. Adjust is a professor pointing to the whiteboard. And report feedback. There's 2 little model cars. One of them is all beat up and the paint is all chipped, and the other one's been restored and looks all shiny and new, representing the kinds of changes that you're doing. Those instructors who listen to their students early, show genuine concern for their students' success, and who actually say, I heard you, and here's what we will do differently based on what you've said, or even people who explain why we can't do that, they get better ratings and better response rates at the end of their experiences. And Bob has posted the handout into the chat. Thank you, Bob. So the first thing to do is make sure that the end of term rating is not the first time you're asking for the student's experience. So for all of you who are doing those midterm questions, or even doing one question every unit or one question every week, make it short, make it easy to respond to, and make it actionable, and show the students, actually tell them what you are doing throughout the term in order to respond to their feedback. And they're much more likely to stick with you, and it gives them practice, and it shows them that the feedback that they're providing is useful and meaningful for them. The second part, and Karen asked the question about this earlier, academic reward. And on the screen are people in a roller coaster at the very top of the roller coaster. It's been climbing and climbing. They're just about to go down. People have their hands up and they're smiling and enjoying a summer day at a theme park. But they're all in the same train on the roller coaster, and they're all having the same experience. Academic reward is different from value or monetary award. So for those of your colleagues who are offering your students extra credit, right? Extra credit only goes so far, and many people are philosophically against the idea of extra credit. I'm one of them. Do the work for the class, and that's the credit. And, if you're not doing well or you're struggling, doing different work but more doesn't really help you. Focusing on the foundations, that actually helps. So I tend not to be a fan of extra credit. The academic reward that I'm talking about here is peer pressure rewards. So instead of saying, if you, individual student, do your student ratings, talk to the class at large. Say, everybody, the student ratings are coming up. If more than 85% of you do your student ratings, then you will have the option to drop one of the essay questions off of the requirements on the final examination. Or if more than 90% of you actually do the student ratings, then you can earn up to 1 or 2% of your total course grade. But tying that to everybody does it creates peer pressure. Did you do it? Have you done it yet? I want to get that reward. And Shelley's saying she's tried that. It seems to give a small bump, but I still end up with less than 70%. You'll notice too that none of these are magic wands. None of these are going to take a 60 or 70% response rate and magically turn it into 90. But if you take them together, they can increase those student rating responses. So Shelley is pointing something out that is important to understand here, that none of these by themselves are a silver bullet, a magic wand, something that works really, that is perfect or moves the needle super, super fast. When we think about academic reward as well, one of the ones that doesn't talk about the numbers or grades or anything like that I really love is, if the student ratings go above a certain percentage, then I will include 1 or 2 questions on the exam that you give to me, and have a study session with the students where they write the exam question and with your input on it, and then you put those exam questions in. So giving them more of a voice in how they are assessed. That's an academic reward that lots of people can get behind. Oh, I'm going to know the answer ahead of time for this. Spoiler alert, that's teaching, right? So that's an okay thing to do as well. But academic reward can flex to what you are comfortable with as an instructor in terms of giving out that reward. The third strategy is having everyone do it. On your screen are students sitting on the floor and in the stands of a giant academic lecture hall. All of them are facing the camera and holding up their mobile phones. Just because we have moved from filling in bubble sheets on a piece of paper to an electronic instrument doesn't mean that we shouldn't expect everyone to do the survey. It used to be that we would set aside an entire class period, or at least a portion of a class period, when we were teaching face-to-face classes. We'd set that time aside for the students to actually do the student ratings. And we ended up with fairly good student rating response rates. It wasn't 100%. Many people say, yeah, they were all in the classroom and we had a captive audience and my response rates were always 100%. They were never 100%. Students could sit there and just not fill it in. A student might be sick on that day and out. Lots of different reasons why students didn't do the survey, even when it was sitting in front of them. But if we do make time for the survey, even though it's electronic, say, here's 20 minutes where I'm going to leave the room and I'd like for you to do the survey. That creates that social expectation. And Megan's saying in the chat, I feel like when a large scale market research survey is sent out, they're happy with around 35%, which is shocking. It's not actually shocking, strangely enough. And this is something, and Megan's saying realistically, they get 10 to 30%. Megan is onto something here as well. And I sometimes mention this and sometimes don't. But if you have a class of 15 students, A, I'm jealous, and B, you have to have about 12 of them respond to the survey in order to get statistically meaningful and valid results. So if you have a small class to begin with, your sample has to be fairly large in order for patterns and trends to average out. When you get up to 30 students, you only need to have about 15 of them respond in order for that to be a statistically valid response. If you have 100 students, it's 10. If you have 300 students, it's like 7 students is a valid sample of that sample size. This may seem counterintuitive, but ask your mathematics and statistics colleagues. As the sample size goes up, a representative sample, you need fewer and fewer percentage in order to have a statistically valid sample. So the next time you have a department chair or a dean saying your response rates are really low, you can say, I'm teaching 200 students. 30 students out of that is plenty good. And it's either in the handout, I can't remember if I have those data in there, but I'll send that around to you if you want it. And Megan says, is it more statistically valid with more responses? Heck yes. The greater the percentage of students who are responding, the more reliable the patterns and data tend to be. Shelley's saying, how do you facilitate this in an asynchronous online course? So traditional online courses where we don't meet, there's no live component, there's no Zoom webinar like we're doing today. I taught those since 1999. And what I did with them is, instead of saying, here is 20 minutes to do the survey, I said, here's the day for the survey, or the 2 or 3 days. So in terms of having the long period of time, if my institution gave a week to do those end of term ratings for my online traditional asynchronous students, I would say, hey, traditional online asynchronous students, our time for doing the surveys is Friday through Sunday. And that got the response rates up because there was that expectation that we're going to shift away from teaching and learning directly and into the end of term survey. I also did strategy number 1 with my traditional online students as well. I told them at the end of every single one of our units, before we shift into the other unit, I'm going to ask you 1 or 2 targeted questions. And we'll talk about what those might look like in a couple of minutes here. But when I ask those targeted questions in week 2, in week 6, at the midterm, and so on, my students got used to the idea that I wanted to know what was going on, and they made time for those rating forms. And then the last part is literally making time for it. On your screen are students in the classroom on laptops, and they're all smiling and enjoying what they're seeing on the screen. So they might not be actually doing the ratings. At the same time, having a time and a space for the ratings is an important psychological cue for us. So if you can bring your students into a computer lab environment, if you can bring the loaner laptops from your department into the classroom at that time, if you can ask all of your students to bring their mobile devices in on that particular day, set them up, put it in the syllabus, put it in the course calendar. This is when we're doing the course ratings. Help them see it coming, give them practice opportunities, and make the time for it. So having everybody do it. Remember back when we did online courses for the very first time, and some students were doing the online version of the ratings and some students were doing the paper version? Making sure everybody does the same thing, the same way, in the same time period creates that sense of social obligation, and making the time for it does as well. So on your screen now is a really old visual pun from the 1977 movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, in which the knights who are seeking the Grail encounter the bridge keeper at the bridge of death. And the bridge keeper says, I will ask you 3 questions, and if you get them right, you can cross. But this is not meant to be a movie history lesson. We're going to talk about the 3 questions. And for those of you who are using the IDEA instruments, these are taken from those IDEA instruments. There are 3 questions that actually give you a normative rating of the instructor, and they tend to cluster around each other statistically. Overall, I rate this instructor an excellent teacher. Strongly agree, strongly disagree, anywhere in between. The instructor explained material clearly. The instructor provided frequent feedback. So when we think about overall rating, those tend to be more reliable and more consistent from student to student to student. A student who loves this professor and was kind of lukewarm about that professor will give a consistent rating across questions like these. The instructor explained materials clearly. This one gets to, did the student feel like learning took place? Now that's a different question than, did the student actually learn it? So the challenge here is the students are rating their experience of being in the instructor's course. And the last one, the instructor provided clear and frequent feedback, timely and frequent feedback. This gets to, as an instructor, is this person engaged with the students? And having those quick check-ins at week 2, at week 6, at the midterm, testing out, seeing what's going on with the students, and getting information and ideas back to them quickly, even if it's simple feedback, that is a good predictor of overall teaching quality. Now, last thing to say here before we open it up for a couple of questions. The challenge for us is that students are not qualified to evaluate what we do in our teaching. Our peers can tell us whether we're good teachers. Our department chairs, our deans, our administrators can observe us and give us feedback as professionals to professionals. Our students, if we ask them questions like, the instructor gave an appropriate amount of homework, they don't know. They have no basis for knowing. The instructor explained concepts, the instructor explained concepts clearly. Yeah, what we're asking there is, did I understand what the instructor said? And if I didn't, could the instructor get me to understand? So you see that there's a very different set of questions. So if you're using those IDEA questions, or you have some psychologically and psychometrically normed question sets, those are the ones that you're going to use. And these 3 questions are the ones that tend to be, across all ratings of all instructors, the most consistently honest and correlatable ones. So when we're thinking about our campus strategies, there's a night shot of a campus near a lake in the background here. When we're thinking about our campus strategies, focus on that formative feedback, the kind of stuff that many of you were talking about, those quick 1 or 2 question pieces at week 2, week 6, at midterm to drive the response rate on the summative instruments at the end of term. Show your actions related to survey responses. One of my colleagues in the psychology department at my previous institution, on day 1, when most other people were reviewing the syllabus, she posted the responses to the student end of term ratings from the previous semester. And she put them up on a screen and said, this is what the people who just went through this course thought about it, wanted to know more about, thought were the strengths, and wanted more. And she would go through point by point and say, here's how I'm going to respond to them with you. So she actually closed that feedback loop in a very intentional way. And if you can tie your response rates to meaningful course-related rewards, those academic rewards, those are the things that are going to help you as you go forward into more student ratings and getting those response rates up. So with that, we've got a few minutes left here. On your screen are some takeaways, some food takeaways: guacamole, salsa, chips, tortillas in the back, elotes, the Mexican street corn, and a margarita in a jar. This is the kind of takeaway food that I like. I'm actually getting hungry just talking about it. But I'd like to hear, what's a question you've still got, or what's the one big thing that you're taking away from our time together? So I'm going to put the question into the chat. You can tell I'm typing live because I've just made a couple typos. Let me put that in here. What's your one big takeaway from our time here together? I'm not going to put music or thinking time, but if you want, open up your microphone and share, or post it in the chat. We'll give voice to it, and I'm happy to answer questions or hear stories as well here at the end of our time. So what's your one big thing? What's something that you learned, something you want to try, something you're still curious about? One big thing. We've got some responses coming into the chat here. Anybody want to open up a microphone and share as well? Let's give voice to some of the things that are coming through in the chat here. Elena says, the scarf loop was new for me. Thank you for your time and resources. That scarf loop, I can't actually take credit for that. That is an idea from Jean Mandernack at Grand Canyon University. She was my co-author when she and I and Annie Taylor from Penn State wrote a book called Evaluating Online Teaching. And it was her idea of that solicit, compile, adjust, return feedback loop. So I want to give credit where credit is due there. Shelley is saying, I want to apply these recommendations to my own survey feedback practice. It may take a long time, if at all, to see these changes implemented at the institutional level. And Shelley, you'll notice that I was talking at what individual instructors can do versus what can you do at the department level, like giving everybody time for it. And what can you do at the institutional level by thinking about those time windows. So a lot of the strategies that we talked about that don't work, those are things that we can fix mostly at the systemic level. And some of us have that influence and some of us don't. So it's good of you to point out that we can do the little pieces and we can also advocate for some of the bigger ones. And Elena says, we listened to her session the other day. I remember Jean was part of this. That's fantastic. Megan says, I like the peer pressure rewards. You'll notice that I'm leaning heavily on cognitive psychology in a lot of the strategies that I'm going back to. When we think about the reward systems that we've set up for our colleges and universities, grades are the biggest motivator and driver for a lot of students. And when we move away from those social those concrete expectations, we get into the realm of social expectation. And everything that we do that takes students sense of obligation away actually runs counter to those student rating response rates getting higher. So keeping people in that social obligation mindset is a useful thing. Cool. Megan says, absolutely, social psych as well. Elena says, let's see, Bob Hale says, close the loop, making sure that your students know and understand what you've heard them tell you and what actions you're going to take or even not going to take based on their feedback to you. The biggest reason that people don't do rating surveys is they feel that they are meaningless or their voices will not count or be heard. So show them, hey, there's my comment up on the screen. I heard the professor talk about this, and that's the thing I talked about. So even if it's at the level of talking to your students in terms of general trends in the feedback, they're going to feel heard. Liz says the peer pressure aspect of rewards as an incentive is something I haven't considered. I like targeted bullet evals at key points in the course as well. Here's something that isn't on a slide, but I'll share it with you. My very favorite rating instrument. It is at week 2 or week 3 of a traditional 15, 16-week term. And it's 2 questions. One of them is closed-ended. How much of the reading are you able to do so far? 100%, 80%, 60, 40, 20. I'm so sorry I haven't done any reading. The second question is open-ended, text. And it is, what's one thing that's getting in the way of you being able to give your best effort to this class? Those 2 things tell me enough at the beginning of a class experience to make adjustments, to hear the students and acknowledge the challenges that they're facing, and to head off challenges and problems that could become serious later on and force students to stop out or drop out. So that 2-question quiz, I like to give that at week 2 or 3, and I like to do it again after the midterm sometime, just to take a temperature check with my students. They don't have to be big, long, here, answer these 20 questions kind of things. Let's see. Megan says, one question not entirely related, but how are you able to copy and paste the chat into your presentation without exiting full screen mode? PowerPoint has developer tools, and one of them is a text box tool. I can be happy to show you offline how to do there. And so we've got some aha moments here, but thank you, everybody. We're just going to wrap up now. So I'll say thank you. If you want to learn more about what I do, here's a picture of me with my books. I talk about lots of different cool things. My website is thomasjtobin.com, and I'd love to work with you or your institution. So thank you very much for coming to this TTLE session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Let me turn it back over to Bob for some closing.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tom. As always, valuable, practical information people can take away and implement. That's what I want. So, as always, excellent.
Thank you much. Glad to have your voices here. I'll see you in the session. Take care, everybody. Bye now.